Once again, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. And John, we can start with you.
Sure, my name is John Crisp. I'm a senior managing director and principal at Cassidy Turley. We're a real estate company that does a little bit of everything in real estate with the exception we don't own and we don't develop.
Scott Travis, Senior Vice President of Development for Buckingham Companies, 30-year-old company based in Marion County. Started in low-income housing and urban development and have grown into mixed use and complicated projects in this region and in up to 9 states currently.
My name is Steve Delaney. I'm with Sitehawk Retail Real Estate. We've actually been in business for 32 years. We do tenant representation, landlord representation, and property management. And we're located here in Indianapolis.
Good morning. I'm Greg Shockett with Shockett Hotels. We develop, own, and operate franchised hotels, primarily in the mid-scale world, hotels like Hampton Inn, Holiday Inn, Hilton Garden Inn.
Hello, my name is Todd May. I'm Vice President of Development with J.C. Hart Company. We've been in business for since 1976. We focus on luxury apartment communities. We build, manage, and develop them. We have about 4,200 units in central Indiana and the surrounding region.
Good morning, I'm Zeph Weiss, and what I'm going to try to do is have these guys tell us what's going on around town. You've heard earlier today what's happening downtown, and I'm going to ask these gentlemen to contrast that with what's happening around town, and I'll let them define what that means. I think the focus that I'd like to hear us talk about is Marion County, although naturally it's an integrated metropolitan area and there's a lot going on. But I'm going to start with John, because I know you do things downtown as well, and we heard a little bit about the market downtown, and I think you don't necessarily disagree with the discussion of the demand for downtown office space, but tell us what's happening around town, why it's happening around town, and what the impact is on that as it relates to downtown.
Zeph, I think what we see, I reached out to a few folks whose opinion I value prior to today, and each one of them came back with the same answer. What's driving our market is our well-educated, affordable workforce. So as we continue, and that's a pretty plentiful workforce that's out there, as we continue to have that and that workforce has a strong work ethic, I think that'll do a lot for the around town as well as our downtown. And all you got to do is look in the newspaper, look in the journal, and see the number of jobs that have come to Indianapolis post-recession. We lead our competitive set when you start to look at Columbus, St. Louis, Nashville. We're the leader by a long shot on jobs that have recovered since the recession, and that can only do great things for everyone on this stage.
Tell us about office space outside of downtown, what's been successful and why, and what do you see that could make it successful in other areas of the surrounding area of the city?
It's simple. The landlords who've put money into their properties are the ones that are having the most success. So when we look at a couple of key areas, we look at Parkwood, we look at Keystone of the Crossing, we look at the North Meridian Corridor. When we sit here in a market in Indianapolis with an overall vacancy of 20%, those little submarkets that I mentioned sit somewhere in the mid-90s, some extent 98% occupied. And these are the owners that, when times were tough, when 08 hit, 09, they decided to invest in their real estate, and those are the ones that are having the most success right now.
Yes, Steve, is it retail or multifamily, or what's driving the demand to get the office space there? Which comes first?
That's a good question. There hasn't been a lot of retail development, new retail development in Indianapolis in the surrounding areas for a variety of reasons. Demand for one, and that's kind of maybe where you're asking, which comes first. What you're seeing a lot of, though, right now is, and the panel is up here before, and Scott, who is involved now, both of these gentlemen, is you see apartment above and retail below. You're seeing that all around town, and particularly in the suburbs and in downtown Indianapolis. So you're seeing that. You're seeing new retail developed as the suburbs stretch. You're seeing some new development, not as much as you used to. Again, you're seeing infill developments such as Ursul's Broad Ripple garage project. And then you see redevelopment. A good example of that is at 86th and 86th and Keystone, the Ironworks project. That was a lost project that was there before called Woodfield that was sitting abandoned. They came in and have spent about $35 million. Again, it's apartment above and office below, or retail below, about 36,000 square feet. So we're seeing a lot of that around town. And but as it relates to office, I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
Well, I guess my question is it the surrounding neighborhoods that are causing the demand, for example, the retail that is being successful, or are people coming because the retail's there? In other words, at Keystone, the Crossing, where Ironworks, what's driving it? Is it the people commuting there to go to Keystone, or people living around there and the retail's
I mean, that's a chicken and egg. It's both. I mean, obviously, you want to provide retail, daily needs or what people want, and that's why I say that you see some of the new development out in the new growth areas. But at the same time, that was an infill area that once was a successful project called Woodfield. Now, like I said, it had closed up, but there's a huge population there, a huge demand. It's adjacent to Keystone at the Crossing, which is the highest dollar per square foot retail center in the state. So, but again, I can answer the question either way.
Hey, Scott, tell us about a walkable solution. What does that mean, and how can that relate to areas outside of the core of the city?
Well, I think probably the best way to start, or to answer that question, is to start with a paradigm shift in the multifamily arena. I'm going to speak mostly to market rate today, and that's the leader. It's leading the MPI in multifamily, and it's being driven by the customer base. It is the market that's driving this right now, and that's our primary business focus right now with Buckingham. And the reason you think about why a person wanted to be in an apartment 3 to 5 years ago compared to why they want to be in one today. It used to be cost effective. It was more economical to be in an apartment than in a house. Today you could probably look at it and say it's much more expensive to rent than it is to buy. It's a complete paradigm shift in that regard. Location. We generally wanted to buy or rent an apartment in the community that we wanted to ultimately live in and buy a house in. Today, the consumer of multifamily or residential rental property is looking for location as a temporary concept. They don't want to live in a community for more than maybe 2 or 3 years. So they're looking for, I'm going to try this out for a little while, then I'm going to move over here, I'm going to try this out. I may move to another city. But right now it's kind of a test for where they want to live and the lifestyle they want. And then the third thing is really that connectivity or the walkability factor. Many of you, I'm sure, know about Walk Score. If you take a look at that map and you really hone in on it, you'll look at a community like Indianapolis as a general whole is about 60 points. But if you get into some of the very tight infill communities within Indianapolis or Fountain Square, Broad Ripple, those numbers bump up to 70, 90 even. And that's really indicative of what is available to that person living in that apartment without the need to get in their car. I don't think that in Indiana we're going to jump out of our cars and become a transmodal community base. We're going to depend on our cars. They're going to be in the garage. But the younger, the millennials, and even the empty nesters like myself who have moved downtown, we depend on our cars a lot less. And that's replaced the idea of I want an apartment near an on-ramp that gets me to my work in the shortest distance, or I'm on the shortest drive to my employer. And so with those three things, really a fundamental shift in our customer, the product has reacted tremendously to that. So from a walkability perspective, I think the Ironworks is a perfect example. There may be 3 or 4 restaurants in that building that they love. They'll probably still get in their car and go across over to Keystone, even though it's it really is 100 yards away. But the concept of being able to walk down and grab a beer at an establishment and the first floor of your own building is tremendously a tremendous driver for someone to want to live in that building. And so this is the new norm for market rate.
Todd, you've done deals downtown. Tell us, you were a little bit of a pioneer on East Street. Tell us about that property. And then I also know you've got a lot of suburban property. Tell us the contrast between the two and the types of people that are living there. And once again, I want you to tell me how we can bring high-quality multifamily around town as opposed to just downtown.
Well, back in 2004, 2005, really in the early 2000s, most of the residential that was going on downtown was the high-end condo development. And of course, in 2005, 2006, that really came to a halt. And what was happening was there was just a tremendous amount of pent-up demand to live downtown, especially with the millennials, but they could not afford a $250,000, $350,000 condo, so they kind of got shut out. And there was apartment stock downtown, but it was kind of spread out, smaller. It wasn't necessarily new and highly amenitized like you're seeing today, or if it was near the canal, it was mostly student. And so when the condo market crashed, it really presented a lot more opportunities for apartment developers to come in and start meeting that pent-up demand, and it's been basically insatiable. I mean, I think we're still, it's still one of the strongest submarkets, not only in the city, but also the state. A lot of the new supply that's coming on is getting absorbed. It's getting absorbed at strong rents, north of $1.40, $1.50. We're seeing a lot of millennials, but we're also seeing a lot of people over the age of 35 living downtown. Really like the access to where they work, but we also have a lot of reverse commuters. They wanted to live downtown. They're not sure they wanted to stay there, but they wanted to try it out for a year or two, hopefully 3 or more, and then decide where they're going to live. So, between downtown and the suburbs, all the new properties now are highly amenitized in their own boundary, but I think what you're seeing developers do is we're trying to find locations that have amenities really outside of our boundary. It could be near a park. That could be in a mixed-use development where you're able to park your car at the end of the day and you're able to, get a beer somewhere. Our Fort project on the east side, which is probably the only multifamily development to be built there in quite some time, is part of the Lawrence Village mixed-use development. You can get out of your car and you can walk to a state park. I don't know if there's another project around that can say that. You're just trying to take advantage of what's around you. So whether it's a retail center, like you're seeing a lot at the Keystone at the Crossing, or parks, you're trying to find locations that affords you amenities that you can't do yourself.
Tell us just one part in terms of what can we do to keep multifamily, high-quality multifamily inside Marion County but outside of the downtown area? I mean, I know you've got, for example, Broad Ripple, Fountain Square, and another place you just mentioned, but do you see the ability to do that in the future, or do you think around town for multifamily is going to push out to the outer edges?
The difficulty or the challenge for multifamily developers like ourselves in Buckingham, F&C, are really the costs involved. The construction costs keep climbing, and what that's doing is it's pushing up the rates that justify that new construction. So we're really looking around to areas, whether it's Marion County or in the suburbs, Fishers, Carmel, Zionsville. We're trying to find locations that can support that rent. That rent's gone from 96, 97 cents a square foot 5 years ago. It's pushing past $1.10. I think most of the new properties are now $1.12 to $1.15. So it takes very strong demographics to support that rent. So, there's plenty of areas within Marion County that would be able to support that. But it really is kind of that chicken or the egg thing that you've got to develop those amenities. You've got to develop that convenient lifestyle that people to pay that type of rent will want.
Okay, I'm going to let Scott do this in a minute. And Greg, tell us about hospitality. What are you seeing around town? Why is it changing, and what do you look to see in the future?
Well, the comment was made this morning. It was very true about the tourism industry and the convention center and all the big events that downtown Indianapolis attracts. So while a lot of that stuff is taking place in downtown, it will impact the entire area, because the week before NRA was here, we had the firefighters. So you had like 50,000 people in town for 4 or 5 days. So that kind of fills up the whole area. So our business in general is starting to come back from the depths of the recession. It has been now for about 2 years. But the interesting dynamic that we're dealing with is, because there's been so much new supply added to the downtown area, that kind of affects the around town areas around Marion County. So a lot of times you used to see a lot more overflow when downtown would fill up. Downtown doesn't necessarily fill up, or downtown does fill up now quicker. The surrounding areas don't fill up the way that they used to off of downtown. So we're seeing some weaker spots around town that we wouldn't have maybe seen 5 or 10 years ago, because there's just so much more supply, and there's also more supply that's come online in those around town areas. So things are improving, but there's certain pockets that are performing a lot better than other areas.
Do you see the opportunity for new growth for hotels and motels outside of downtown, or do you think that increase in demand downtown is going to make that difficult?
I think it's going to make it difficult. I see more of an opportunity outside of Marion County, because it kind of goes along with what was said this morning too. But between downtown and say the ring of 465, it doesn't seem like there's as much going on as outside that ring, and there's a lot going on in some of the suburbs right now. Like, for example, the Grant Park thing has got a lot of people interested in all kinds of development. So that's kind of an interesting new product where there's something that would generate new demand. I don't necessarily see that inside 465 as much as outside right now.
Scott, you want to comment on both the hospitality aspect of that as well as the multifamily, since you're in both?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to tag on a little bit to the multifamily in the around town area, and what are some of the what I see as some of the drivers for this. And we talked about, in the previous panel, talked about transit and the need or not need for a rail, the need or not need for improvement on our bus system. I think it's no question our bus system needs improvement, and it will receive that. And I think there's opportunities for rail to make connections out to our satellite communities. But those are not really the drivers that are going to make a difference in the around town area. It's the cultural trail that we have. It's the bike system that we just installed. It's a new car share program that's going to come online. We have all these connectivity points that are largely haven't been used even at even the slightest level, that will grow and become much more appealing. And if you look at those arteries and the way that those systems are overlaid in our city, there are a ton of opportunities. If you look at the corridor, Virginia corridor, and what's changed there really isn't anything between here and Fountain Square. But with a cultural trail, there's a huge, vibrant life that's developing and has in the last probably 36 months. So I think if you look at those, you're going to find some pockets and some activity zones that didn't exist before. As far as the hotel market's concerned, I tend to agree that sort of in-between zone is going to be a challenge for any new hotel development. But our urban core can we can certainly support quite a bit more rooms.
I want to see who wants to kind of take this. Several years ago, there was a company that's no longer around, and I think they went by more space, less money. It seems that in really multifamily, office, and other areas that we're now looking at less space, less money. Tell me what's happening in that market. I guess I'll start with you, John, in the office market. I know my firm, we have in essence restructured so that we're using our space more efficiently. We have lots of boxes, contrary to what was mentioned earlier today, but those boxes are not as big as they used to be for a lot of reasons. But what are you seeing?
Well, exactly. I don't know your exact numbers, but in general, gave back 2 floors, took a little bit of space across the street, and you're still hiring. So I think that probably has a little bit to do with who you compete with today, where it used to just maybe be other firms here in Indianapolis. You're now competing on a national basis. And as you do that and the demands are there, the rest of the world has had to respond maybe to their market. So in New York, their reasons, or in San Francisco, their reasons for right-sizing, if you will, their offices may be different than what led to ours here in Indianapolis. It's still, our markets are bigger. So you have to respond to it. I think that we're seeing a lot of it. When we used to say the word right-size, in 08, 09, it was companies that had to figure out how to lower their costs. And I think today's world has more to do with what the new employee is looking for and how you can be more competitive moving forward.
Yeah, retail, it's kind of interesting. The same kind of thing is going on. When 2008 hit and people were looking for alternative ways to do business, they decided to downsize. If you look at the PetSmarts and the Petcos, they used to be 20,000 feet, now they're 10 to 12,000. You look at the office suppliers, they used to be 20,000, now they're 6,000 to 8,000. You look at the bookstores, if you all remember Borders, they don't even exist anymore. So not only has the times changed, but technology has changed. So we're seeing a downsizing. I thought it was interesting that Tom McGowan said there's actually offices in Bloomberg's office that has no walls. And so I think retail is looking at that same kind of thing. Let's downsize. We can do the same amount of business out of less square footage. The other thing that they're doing a lot of is going online and making a business online, and that also means less square footage in the centers.
How is that going to impact, the drive for additional retail space?
Huge. It's huge. If you look around, I mean, you see a lot of boxes, particularly the bigger boxes in centers all around town that are empty, and it's just because they have either gone out of business or don't need the space that they once had. So that's what's causing the lack of new development, because there's a lot of infill space.
So repurposing, or are they going to tear them down?
No, they'll repurpose. No, they won't tear it down, in my opinion. It's good space.
Todd, what about the multifamily in terms of on a going forward basis? Are you building bigger boxes, or are you making them more efficient, or what are you doing? Because you said you're getting up to $1.50 a foot. Is it the same space, or are people willing to live in less space?
Well, one of the trends in multifamily right now, and for some time really, is to get a little smaller. The average square footage of a unit used to be 1,100 or so, and now it's down to 950, 940. But what we're also seeing and doing is building more studio-sized units, 450 to 550 square feet. Now, that traditionally would be something you'd see in an urban development where you're trying to bring someone that wouldn't be able to afford that rent. You're just picking up a new price point. But we're also doing that in the suburbs, which you wouldn't think would work, but we're doing that on a smaller basis and just a few units per building, and they're very successful. I mean, it's the same concept. We're picking up someone that maybe didn't want to afford that. They don't have a lot of belongings. It's usually a younger profile, so it's a much smaller unit. 500 square feet sounds really small, but you build that very efficiently, a lot of open space, and I've been in some of these units, and they're very livable. The other thing that we're doing, we're seeing a lot more of, is just trying to get more of a single-family aspect into new development. So what I mean by that is you're not seeing as many of these big, huge 40, 50-unit buildings anymore. They're really getting down to 8 to 10 units. And what happens on the design side of that, the design aspect, is that you're basically, every unit has 2 walls worth of windows. And it's a big deal because it's attractive to someone that's coming out of a house that could be downsizing. They want multifamily living that's much like what they just came out of, which is a single-family home. So the old barrel unit that had windows just at your porch, and that was it, unless you open your door. Now you've got 2 walls of windows, so it feels much more like the home they came out of. So that's a design trend that you're seeing continue, just much smaller building sizes, maybe more buildings, but smaller buildings.
Greg, anything in the hospitality industry in terms of size?
Yeah, I guess hospitality, one of the trends is probably the reverse of what everyone is talking about, because kind of a new generation of products that's coming from all the franchise companies like Marriott, Hilton, Intercontinental Hotels is more of these, what they call suite products, but to your point, it's more like a studio. So like when I traditionally think of a hotel suite, I think of a 2-room suite, what we call 2 bays. But these new prototypes, like an example would be Hilton just came out with a new product called Home 2 Suites. It's more of like a bay and a half, so it's not a full 2 rooms, but it's very smartly designed. So it feels like you actually have a nice, comfortable, separate living area and a separate sleeping area. And partly because these are newer, and in the world of franchising and branding, they want to sell what's new. But and so the existing stock is a little bit older, but because this is a newer product, this is what's a little bit more popular now. But each brand kind of has their own version, and Hyatt has gotten in now to the mid-scale segment, so they have their what they call Hyatt Place, which is also kind of the same kind of design. So a lot of the newer products and a lot of the new construction stuff is actually kind of a little bit bigger as far as the total square footage in the guest room.
Anybody want to talk about trends resulting from lender concerns? I mean, rates still, relatively speaking, are at a low. What about the concerns of the lender? What are they asking of you today, or the expectations they have today that they didn't have a few years ago? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, the fact that they're lending again is good news. The underwriting process is extremely different in today's world than it was 5 years ago. Checks and balances, making sure that every single component of your project, especially in a mixed use, makes it even a little bit more complicated for us. But the underwriting process is tremendously different than it was before.
What about, John, what about in the office segment in terms of the TI? What's the requirement now from the lender and the landlord before they'll put a lot of space in for a tenant?
Well, we're at an interesting spot. It's really at somewhat of a crossroads because as we sit here in a market that has 6 million square feet of vacant space, 20%. I mentioned earlier some of the little submarkets that are well into the 90s. For the vacant space to compete, they need to spend money. And to do that, because right now what we're hearing from the users or what's out there, their options, there's either not enough big blocks of space or the space that's out there isn't doing it for them. So I spend all my time on the tenant side of the business. So I can give you a million good reasons why you landlords ought to spend more money. But the question's going to be is will the tenant pay for that new shiny space? And that's the $1 million question. But right now we're seeing with construction costs up, it takes a little bit more money to do what we used to be able to do in the past for less. And what we're seeing is lenders and landlords are asking deeper questions into the financial picture of what a tenant looks like. But still, with the 20% vacancy, as long as we can find one or two that don't go too deep, we still have our success.
Well, I'm going to let Steve talk. I'm going to mention one thing, and that is, from where I sit, representing typically the landlord, I'm very concerned about the credit worthiness of the tenant and what we're going to look at down the road. If you're going to invest big money into retail space or an office space, you better make sure that there's someone behind it to pay for it. And it's more common today that I'm seeing that we're saying to the tenant, tell you what, you put in the space. Well, we're happy to have you, but go ahead. Tell me about
Just
that.
real quick, and I see a lot of bankers and lenders out there, so I maybe won't say this one right, but before 2008, you could, at least in retail, you could come into a project with no money down, no tenants lined up, and you could make a deal. After that, you couldn't get money at all in 2009, 2010. Then slowly the market has come back around. But they require, and it varies, and I'm sure different answers from different people, but somewhere between 20 and 50% equity in a typical deal. They may want up to 50% or more pre-leased before they'll lend you the money. So it's just a much, much more difficult process. And the checks and balances that everybody's mentioned are certainly there times 3, whereas back in the old days, I don't even know if there were checks and balances. It was gung-ho, and I'm sure you remember that, Zeph.
Greg, I know it's got to be tough in the hospitality industry just in terms of financing. Obviously, you're not doing TI, but what's been the sea change in terms of what lenders are willing to do on both new projects as well as refinancing?
Well, actually, the financing has come back pretty strong in the hotel environment. New construction, we've seen some real positive stuff, as well as refinancing. I'll second the comment about the underwriting process. It's brutal. They ask for anything you can think of, and they want to see it 5 times over. It's just amazing all the stuff they're asking for. And the one thing, to answer your earlier question, that might be a little bit different is it almost seems like they want to see an appraisal every 6 months, and you have to negotiate hard to say, okay, we don't need an appraisal every 6 months. But I would say the conduit market has come back. So we're kind of close to where we were pre-recession as far as being able to get financing closed, especially on the refi. New construction, it's probably not quite there, but it's pretty close. But always probably the biggest thing with the lenders, another change I guess we've seen lately is they're a lot more selective about brands. Certain brands, they'll say absolutely, if it's a Hilton or Marriott brand, no problem. But some other brands, they might take a second look and say, you know what, we're not interested unless it's a Hilton or a Hyatt or a Marriott.
What about the demands of the licensor? What are they requiring today that they didn't require before in terms of either your ability to demonstrate financing or working, capital? What are they requiring of you? And are they getting a better deal today than they did 5 years ago?
No, they always get the best deal possible because it's basically take it or leave it because I got somebody else who wants to put the hotel in that spot. So if you want it, it's yours. If not, take a walk. But pretty much everything is about the same. Some of the franchises will require certain guarantees, and then there's liquidated damages that you personally have to guarantee if you cancel before the end of the term, but by and large, there hasn't really been much change there. I guess one of the changes was in the middle of the recession, you could negotiate a little bit with them because they couldn't get any deals done. Now that their deal flow is coming back, they've got confidence and they're kind of dictating all the terms.
Todd, how about financing in the multifamily area?
Well, I'm not sure I could add too much more to what's been said on the closing process with banks, other than, the 30-day close is about dead. It's tough to get anything closed in 60 days, much less 45. Basically, everything they said is what we see, much more in depth, much more detailed, which is great. Much more due diligence on the sponsor with the financial wherewithal. The third-party reports have become much more sophisticated and complicated. The appraisal process takes over 30 days usually because there's some back and forth. So it's just much more, I want to say cumbersome, but it's much more difficult than it was 10, 12 years ago. Fortunately for multifamily on the finance side, there's Freddie and Fannie still in business, life companies very strong, conduits. There's just a lot of capital out there for both construction loans and for permanent takeout loans. So it's very, very healthy right now.
Zeph, I was just going to add to that. More of my interaction is with landlords than lenders, but both are in the same boat. And this is where art and science match up or come together. But they're in the risk business, and the landlords and the lenders who do better are the ones that manage that risk. And so I think it's when you start to look at the landlords that have filled their buildings. I said it earlier. One, they invested in their real estate, so they took additional risk. They were betting on themselves. And two, these are the landlords that are looking at a deal. And while they're interested in the financials, they're also interested in the people that they're doing business with, in the companies that they're doing business with. If it's a law firm, if it's an accounting firm, whoever it may be, how long have they been around? Who are the principals that are in charge? What is the succession plan of that company? And so that piece where I think can get lost a little bit in this discussion, when you look at the landlords that are having the most success, and my guess is that trickles to the lenders as well, it's the folks that can bring that art and science together faster and be better at it that are the ones that are succeeding, I think, will, moving forward.
What you see downtown, I don't necessarily want to call it winners and losers, but there's obviously a lot going on downtown, and we heard about that in the first hour of this discussion. What's the impact around town, and how does the around town developers address that and compete? What do they do to make where they are sparkle and keep either people from moving downtown or get people that are downtown moving back to their area? What do they need to do to make that happen? Anybody want to take that one?
From an office perspective, it's the same thing in both markets. It's that we're hearing a lot of buzzwords, but it's that walkability, it's that livability, it's space that this next generation wants to live in, more open, more natural light. Tom mentioned it earlier in his trip to New York. You wouldn't have heard that statement 10 years ago. So making space that, from an office perspective, if you see Clay Terrace is doing incredibly well. You look at Keystone the Crossing doing incredibly well. So these environments that have the live piece with it, where you can grab a quick bite to eat, but you can also grab something that if you need from a shop on your way home. That livability, walkability is key, I think, moving forward. And we brought up Ironworks earlier. Before you had a set of shops there that were sort of surrounded in their own little area. You had Woodfield Crossing office buildings that sat just south of it. Those are now, although they're different owners, they're connected. And there's some conversation, I don't know where it is today, but there may even be a drive connecting, but there's definitely going to be walkability. So the connection between the office and the retail / living is coming together, and you'll see success follow.
I was down in the Fountain Square area for dinner not too long ago, and I saw some multifamily pockets in their building that looked good. I mean, what's driving that? It seems like what you've been talking about, but how do you take that and duplicate that elsewhere, outside of Broad Ripple, outside of Keystone at the Crossing, and outside of Fountain Square? I mean, how do we get that? Someone was talking earlier about on the east side and on the west side. I mean, what do we need to do to to make that happen? Because clearly there are pockets that could benefit from that, and probably there are a lot of people living out there. Steve, any thoughts on that?
I thought you were talking more about multi-unit, but
Well, I am, but it seems to me that people want to live there because you can go walk and have a bite to eat or find a place
oh,
to
yeah, I
hang
think that's
out.
definitely the future, and that's why downtown's so successful. And if you look at downtown, I mean, some of these projects, such as the Cityway, which is one of the few projects that's been built downtown, and that has a retail component. That's what they're looking for. That and Scott talked about it, is the ability to walk, and that you can come downstairs and have the amenities, or you can walk to downtown. I mean, that's maybe the best example. Anything that's near downtown. But when you're talking about, what are guys or what are developers or what are people doing to make their project shine or look different from somebody else in the retail market, like I said, there's a lot of empty boxes, there's a lot of empty space. The really good retail, the A quality retail is virtually 100% leased. As you go down the B and C, the vacancy factor gets bigger and bigger. So what do? Well, you're right, they try to, shine the penny and make it look good, number one. Number two, they're offering a lot of incentives, as far as if you come in here, we'll build your space out that they didn't used to do. Number three, they don't like to do it, but they're offering lower rents now than they used to. So a lot of, there's a lot of things that they're doing. The other side of the coin is, what's good about going on in retail is if you look, 2014 is going to be the year of grocery stores. I don't know if you've been reading about it, but there's probably 7 or 8 right now that are actively in the market, and a lot of them are coming into these second generation spaces. They're not building new stores, so this is great. So as the market dynamics happen, particularly in retail, some space that's not desirable today may be in 2014.
So, I'd add on to that. Your question is what can these spaces in between do to make them more livable or more walkable? And I think that, Cityway is a good example of public-private partnership. We changed 14 city blocks on what was really a project that was only 2 blocks big. So extending beyond the limits of your own property are critical, I think, at this point in time. If it's not already there, you have to help the people around you get it to that place, whether it's a community block or it's a community development group or it's the local government. It's about improvements in infrastructure improvements, slowing traffic down, putting crosswalks in that mean something. It's about making that space around your property more viable, more livable for you to be successful and therefore make the community more successful. You can't always bring all the retail that may be missing right now, but you can be the catalyst for it if there's connectivity to what's around you.
Okay, I think it's about time to take some comments from the audience. Is that right?
Do we have any questions for our Around Town panel?
I was wondering, maybe from a reuse standpoint, an area like Lafayette Square seems to be a well-located area of town, but retail seems to have maybe passed that area by. Could you offer any thoughts on the Lafayette Square area?
I think you're talking to me, but I don't know that I can say much. Simon owned that for years. They developed it originally, and then they sold it to a group called Ashkenazi, which is out of the East Coast, and they've tried hard to bring in tenants, and it's been a struggle. I know that beyond that, though, on West 38th Street, there's it's become a multicultural area with a lot of different type of ethnic restaurants and ethnic retailers. So. There is some vibrancy around the mall, but I don't know what the plan is for that. And your question's good, and bigger minds than mine have failed to come up with an answer. So,
Any other? Yes.
A little over a year ago, the city put a TIF district in the Midtown area between Broad Ripple and, say, Mapleton Fall Creek, and we're starting to see that first project percolate off of that TIF district with the Browning development and Broad Ripple Village. We've also seen a lot of retail pushing south out of Broad Ripple, probably because of higher rates in the past. What do you sort of forecast for the residential real estate boom that's happening in Meridian, Kessler, Butler, Tarkington, the Worfley area, alongside of that retail push to the south with this TIF district, if anything?
I think you've pointed out the obvious, that it is in a positive, moving in a positive direction. We still have a gap between downtown and Broad Ripple, and I think that that's going to continue to shrink, but it's going to happen on those main arteries and those main arteries only. I think that you're going to see that small bandwidth from a north to south perspective.
Your question made me think of a thought we discussed on our call. The best friend to the downtown vacancy, to the downtown landlords who are sitting with space, is everything that was mentioned in the first panel and a little bit in this panel, and that's the residential growth that's happening. So the residential piece that you mentioned in Broad Ripple that's pushing south, that'll spur activity along those corridors. The downtown vacancy in our office buildings is definitely going to improve. I think the main key that can help improve our vacancy is the fact that folks are going to live downtown, more people are going to live downtown, which should lead to employers expanding here because they have the workforce as well as companies that otherwise may not have been downtown, as we heard say in Nashville and some other markets, making a decision to be and to locate in our downtown market. So that residential piece is key.